Welcome to the Contrarians, and tonight our topic, how critical and public consensus influenced our musical taste. Panel's here, we are ready, we want to hear from you in the chat, so let's get started. Welcome to the Contrarians, and tonight we have a wonderful topic that Phil came up with. Absolutely spectacular. In fact, I think I'll let Phil talk about it, but the topic tonight, how has critical and public consensus influenced our music tastes? I think it's fascinating. It'll be a general discussion. We're just not looking at albums. We're just looking at a topic. Philip, Peter Jones, and of course, Martin and myself are here. Philip, do you want to just touch on that a little bit and why you thought this would be a good topic?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm at a point in my life as a music fan where I'm really renegotiating a lot of the things that I gospel growing up and getting into rock and metal and other genres, and really, revisiting a lot of things that I used to consider as a given, right? Because of a certain consensus that was given to me by critics, by the public, by my crowds, whatever. And this got me thinking about, obviously how has my taste inevitably been shaped to some extent by the stuff I was reading before the algorithm came into our lives, obviously. And also it got me thinking about the whole notion of gatekeeping. Where I come from in Greece, originally, I live in France, but I come from Greece. We have a lot of gatekeeping. We really love our sacred cows, and we're very fanatic about it. And we're don't you dare tell anyone that there's a bad Iron Maiden album in Greece. Greeks are nuts about Iron Maiden. So there's a lot of gatekeeping, and there's a certain consensus around the fact that they're a sacred cow, right? Any contrarian suggestion would spark quite a angry debate, right? Maybe, I don't know, even a lynch mob would come after you because you said something that's contrarian to the consensus amongst public fans and critics about, let's say, Iron Maiden, back where I come from. And, it's coincidentally, Martin is now doing every day this new series of revisiting old reviews, right? So it kind of is interesting because I think Martin is kind of looking at, for instance, bad reviews of albums that are considered as sacred cows, right? So it's kind of fascinating to see what critics would say, but what the consensus really was, right? So just to give an example of what I mean, at some point in my life, after I got into metal, I started getting more into classic rock. I kept going backwards, and I got into Led Zeppelin. I listened to Stairway to Heaven endlessly. I learned one day, according to some magazine, that it has been voted as the greatest guitar solo of all time, which at the time I was like, yeah, of course, it must be the greatest solo of all time. Now I'm like, no, it's not the greatest solo of all time. It's a great solo, sure, but it's not the greatest solo of all time. But I just got into Led Zeppelin 1 to 4, and the critical and even public consensus told me that an album like this one here, In Through the Outdoor, is not good. Led Zeppelin there have kind of lost it, and it's too weird and poppy and whatever. At some point, when I was much older, I just bought this album. I said, this is great. I love this album. Why was I somehow convinced from various voices in the ether that this album is not worthwhile? And I have many more to reference as we go on, but I think you guys get the point here, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, definitely.
Well, right. I'm sorry.
Go, Peter Jones. Take it away. Go ahead.
It's interesting, and I think I'll start off right off the bat with a very simple two-word definition. As you look it up, what is a consensus? It's a general agreement. Let's talk about vague. Okay, it's a general agreement, and for my approach to this, as I was looking at how influence and critics and consensus plays a role, I always found that it had to have a qualifier with it. Consensus in what way? Let's talk about music. We can talk about consensus based on sales numbers. Well, those are pretty hard and cut and dry. You can't really argue that. The consensus says Pink Floyd's most successful album sales-wise is Dark Side of the Moon. Okay, conversation's over, right? But if they say the consensus is, and it's a small, tiny little twist, but an important distinction in my book, the consensus is Pink Floyd's greatest album is Dark Side of the Moon. Well, now we're in a different ballpark, folks. The sales numbers, they're what they are. But now we're into something completely subjective. It is now up to interpretation. It is up to the individual, what their likes are, what their tastes are. Perfect example. Very few times will the biggest seller in an artist's discography be my favorite album. Very few.
You are on the right channel then, right?
Well, and I've been labeled what I've been labeled, yeah. And why is that? Because I'm not taking anybody else's view of it into play. Only mine. Only what reaches me. Only what moves me. Only what inspires me. When we get, and you used the word lynch, and it's very interesting because I wrote down that I've noticed, especially recently, and it's a new thing, you know, the internet and what's going on with influencers and podcasts. And I have seen on our shows and even the outshoots of people who do their own shows, when they're talking about albums that they like, they will often apologize ahead of time for their pick, saying, I'm sorry if I'm going to upset, or please don't hate me or whatever, because the consensus, or the word I used was mob, is going to come at you, pitchforks and torches at the ready. And for me, I find that just bizarre. Never apologize for what you love and what you don't love. It's yours. It's a consensus of one in this case. The feel and the need to fit in and be associated and be in the like is a very powerful thing now. And that's not something that existed when people my age, I'll be 62 in a couple of weeks, that didn't exist. We liked what we liked. We went and found them mostly on our own because there wasn't a lot of research. And we went and picked out things. And then it was later, when history's been written, people now go back and rank the records and they say, this one's more important, that one's more important. So now somebody who's coming in new is confused. Where do I go? And what do we hear all the time when someone's new to an artist? Where should I start? Right? What does the consensus say? Well, sales says this one, but my emotional feeling says this. And so, quick bow around this, because I'm going to get on too many tangents, is that the consensus has to have that qualifier. If you want to talk about facts, talk about facts. Sales numbers are undisputed. But as soon as you get into best of, now we're into something suggestive and subjective, and it has to then revert to the individual, not to the group speak or the larger consensus. Yeah, in my opinion.
I'll push back a little bit on that, because I think all of us as like super music fans, we, for dozens and hundreds of bands, we know what the biggest bestseller is, but we also know there's a semi-correct answer, I think. I mean, that's obviously a little more bold than you would say, but I think there's a semi-correct answer about what is the consensus 1 or 2 or 3 max best album by that band. In a lot of cases, a whole bunch of bands are coming to my mind where there's a pretty obvious consensus what the best album is, right? So we know that there is a consensus even in this subjective world, right?
To a point. Yeah.
Yeah. To a point. An interesting thing you brought up that I like, this whole where do I start thing, right? I think one of the best things that we've got out there right now is top 10 lists for anything. right? Where do I start for a band? Go look at 3 or 4 top 10 lists. That'll sort you out very quickly. You could do it for a genre, right?
Would that be the equivalent of buying Once Upon a Time a best of CD?
No, it's actually just rock criticism, but it's a type of rock criticism that wasn't done all that often in the old days. It might be closer to a reader's poll or the circus, poll that they did. Couple other points I want to point out. I guess this is my official spot right now, and I'll just tell you all the things I was thinking of. One thing I thought about that was kind of interesting and maybe apropos of nothing. Well, it's apropos. I'll say it in a sec, but I just realized that an album has always cost 90 minutes income. No matter what the price, until physical was over. Then it was for a brief period, an album, if you bought it, was costing 60 minutes income for you. And this goes back to the $4.99 days, the $3.99 days, the $9.99 days, the $15.99 CD days, the $12.99 CD days. But my point that I wanted to get around to is I think critics in the old days, you needed them to help you figure out where to spend your money. And now critics need to help you figure out where to spend your time, because music is now free. I don't care what anybody says about Spotify or YouTube Premium. $13.99 is free. If you're a crazy music fan, and you care about at least 5 albums, it's basically free, right? In a month, right? So music is free. But I think that's the biggest thing that the critic is used for now versus the old days is how do I turn this fire hose into a trickle or into the backyard hose that I can put my mouth around and not get my cheeks shot off, right? It's literally, what can I do to manage my time? I want to get into doom. I want to get into Black and Death. I want to get into shoegaze. That's a hard thing to do on your own without some guidance, right? Because there's such a fire hose of product out there. So yeah, I think critics are still super important. And like I say, in the old days, it was more about, I've got my $4.99 allowance this week, or I can get 2 records maybe this week or 2 this month or whatever it is. I would like some help, right? And, when you're a kid, you look up to your heroes of rock critics and you think, they're actually helping you like this thing if they really like it, kind of thing. You're going, yeah, he likes it. Oh, that's cool, kind of thing. So I think there's still a lot of use for the critics. What else could I say? Yeah. So that whole public consensus thing, we all know Kiss Destroyer is a top Kiss album. We all know Rocks is a top, Aerosmith album. And interestingly enough, we all know that Master of Puppets or Ride the Lightning are the greatest Metallica albums, and it's not the one that sold the most, right? So, generally speaking, there's a rough consensus or something that even on the where do I start thing can help you get there kind of quicker. But yeah, critics, absolutely important. And like I say, I think the best thing you can use, rather than just going to individual reviews like the old days, that's not how you learn about what are a whole bunch of great doom albums. You look up a top 100 list and then another one and see what's at the top of the list. And then you go play those and check it out. And you read the Wikipedia page. That's another great rock critic out there in the world. The Wikipedia page is super important, I think, still.
Yeah, but people today have a diminished attention span, and most people have a subscription to Spotify or anything equivalent. So they'll just go on Spotify, enter the name of the genre, and they'll find a playlist or something. They won't really look at the critic. I don't think so. I used to look indeed at my favorite critics once upon a time during the print era when it was slowly dying. And if there was that favorite critic of mine giving a raving review for something, I'd just go and buy it like that. I wouldn't even care to listen.
Just quickly to respond to that. I would never do that, because one random song picked by one random person with nothing to read about it means nothing to me. It's just like a leaf in the forest. I want to see that short little synopsis of, by somebody writing a top 20 list and tell me a little bit about the band.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know if anyone would do that today, to be honest. But back in the day, that was how we went about things before algorithms basically were able to sort of tell us, you want to hear this, you probably want to hear that, you know? And again, the consensus told me that, like, from a certain point on, I have to be like a 1980s Rush apologist, because I suddenly discovered that I really like Power Windows. But everyone, and when I say everyone, again, I mean critics and the ether, right? The information comes from various places, tells you that this album is really bad because it became like the Police and synth pop and everything. And I discovered I really like this album. But then on the other hand, critics, in where I come from again, absolutely idolized a guitar player, a sort of underground guitar player like Rory Gallagher. And thanks to that consensus, I discovered him. I got all of his CDs, and to this day, he is one of my main influences in how I play the guitar, and I absolutely love him. I don't know if I would have ever gotten into him without the critics raving about
See, Philip, I'll just interject again quickly. So I mean, the idea there is that a whole bunch of people that are probably or evidently, or you thought they were pretty smart, were saying some, you know, a few dozen really interesting things about Rory that you wouldn't have thought of on your own, but now you've heard it. And so now you go back to that record and play it. So those critics, what they say about it totally enhance your enjoyment of that. If you just went and found Rory Gallagher in the store and had no support mechanism, right? No arm around the shoulder saying, "You come on, man, listen to this one now. You got to listen to this one." All of that totally helps you enjoy those records.
Yeah. Which makes me think then, what artists and bands did I discover totally by chance? I need to reflect on that.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Grant.
No, well, I was just going to throw this out. You know, you remember when you were a kid and music was all fresh and new and shiny when you're 13 and you hear these bands? I don't think it was the critics in which you learned, it was your peers, you know? And I think when you're a kid, it's all public consensus, so to speak. It's not the you know, critics in which you go on, you know, like all my buddies, they were all into Kiss. Well, guess what? I'm getting into Kiss. Well, if I hadn't went to my neighbor's house and pulled out that Beatles 45, I might not have ever heard the Beatles for years. But I think when you're a kid, and I think things morph. And I think once you become a music addict and a fan, you start branching out and looking at reviews because you want to take in everything you can get. And I was talking to these gentlemen before we started that, you know, yeah, that was my gateway, was the public consensus. And then I went to the Rolling Stone record guide, and a lot of bands, because think about it, Rolling Stone back in 79, 83, they hated a lot of things. I don't think that was really the best thing for me to read, because they hated Queen, and I love Queen. And even when I was a kid, because my friends like Queen too, and I think that's what probably saved me. And I didn't pay attention to the critics. But like Grand Funk, they never liked Grand Funk. So I didn't pay attention to Grand Funk until I started to do these shows, and people, you know, and until I really reached out. And even in my old age, it's amazing at my age, I reached out and took a hold of Grand Funk. Normally, I wouldn't have done that. So I think a lot of it for me, even though I did read those Rolling Stone record guides, maybe I got a chuckle out of them. Or Robert Christgau, you know how he wrote. You kind of have to chuckle. I think public consensus for me, I think totally influenced my taste. I'm not sure where I was going with that.
So that's interesting. So the critics sometimes steered you wrong or delayed you finding certain bands.
That's the way I look at it now.
Yeah.
Because they always badmouth Styx, even though my buddies liked it and I loved it. When I would read those reviews, I would judge myself. Because I figured Rolling Stone, the mighty Rolling Stone, has to have it right. And by me reading this, I must be wrong. You know? And if you look at Rolling Stone, the later reviews they didn't like Rush back in the day, but then they ended up liking Rush. They changed their minds on things. The critical analysis is a bit, I don't know. You got to take it with a grain of salt. I think that the public, your buddies and the people you hang out with, I think that's what's really important. And just,
I think several things here. If anyone was to try and suggest to you that they had zero impact from outside sources, is being disingenuous. Everybody had to have been impacted by something along the way. Whether you just read Circus Magazine and read the articles of a band that was featured, that may not be, quote, a review, but it's influential.
It's influential.
It has an impact, and they have a new record coming out. Now you see the ad. There's no review yet. You see the ad. Ooh, now I'm excited. I liked this one. Now I'm going to go after that. A great example is I discovered Dream Theater's Images and Words when it came out via a very small paragraph in Modern Drummer magazine. It just said the new Dream Theater is coming out. Drummer Mike Portnoy, shades of Neil Peart. That one sentence was enough for me to go to the store, pick up Images and Words, and I've been a fan since. It was just information that triggered an action to have me move forward. Now, that's just the crack in the door. It's not locked anymore. It's up for me to go through it. It's up to me to do the work, to listen to the band, and then ultimately decide, do I like them or do I not like them? And do I want to move forward? And it's interesting is that we were talking about these larger collective lists of album rankings. And I do think it is a bit ironic that those are made up of a whole bunch of individual giving their subjective opinions into a larger collective. So we have a big collective of a whole bunch of subjective opinions. Now you say, well, that's what opinions are, Pete. Yeah. But my point is, where in the contrast to the album sales, we get a whole bunch of people with opinions who get together. And if 8 out of 10 put this one up there, well, why? We don't know. Discover it. Find out what about it is making this group of collective put this one up a certain way with a caveat. And it's what Phil was talking about, like loving something like Power Windows. The apologist, because what happens is you make your choices, the consensus push back against that. Well, that's not in the upper echelon. You're not a real Rush fan. It's the reaction from that collective back at you when it's hostile that makes this interaction between influence and creativity and subjectivity and objectivity that makes it difficult. And I see that on the rise. I see that becoming a bigger and bigger factor with podcasts and shows. It's not the comment. It's never the comment. It's the reaction to the comment. I like X. Well, I like X is definitive. It's done. You love Power Windows. You love Power Windows. It's the first person, then followed by the like-minded people who go, are you nuts? That's a horrible record. You should like this. You should like this. You should like this. Infinitum. And on it goes. And that's where I think it has gotten to a point that never existed when we were younger.
Yeah.
It was always against our friends. You mentioned Kiss. I'd said it before. I got in fist fights in 75, 76, 77 because people thought Kiss was a joke. But it was personal to me, and I didn't agree. So maybe in that context, it is maybe the same kind of thing, just not done on the internet with words. So maybe it's always been
point. Just another quick thing to interject that we haven't said yet. You know, the idea that Rolling Stone steered you wrong. You will quickly find out that you don't think like Rolling Stone, and you'll discover Cream and Circus and Hit Parader and Record Review. And then all of a sudden you're on the same wavelength and you can trust what they're saying, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
No, and you're exactly right, because what we were saying before we came on is that all the people in Rolling Stone have their own opinions. And like-minded people like to get into like-minded groups with a like-minded agenda. So it's not unusual that they're going to like the same things, the same kind of styles. You don't get a lot of contrast and varied opinions, which is why what Martin says is good. He said you have to go into multiple sources, get as many inputs as you can. I have always said, and this goes back to Philip saying that we don't have the attention span as a collective, My answer to anyone who says, where do I start, is always the same without fail. You start at the beginning.
Yeah.
You start at the beginning.
Totally agree with that. Yeah.
You
I
start
agree
at the
with that
beginning.
too.
You
me too. Yeah.
And you have to tell yourself this is going to be a process. This is going to take some time. I have to vest myself in this. We did it by habit over decades and decades that we went through. We suffered through records before the next release came out going, oh God, I hope the next one's better.
Peter,
Now-
I'll just add also, you start at the beginning and before you're 5 seconds in, you're reading the wiki page at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to, because I don't ever come at this just as a listener. I'm a musician. And I have to say that it's unfair to an artist to say, well, okay, let's use Rush. He said, well, here, just started moving pictures. Well, I think that's disingenuous. And then it slants, colors, because the order in which we experience something matters. So if you go back to the way it was originally intended, you don't buy a book that's been written for 50 years and start in chapter 10.
Yeah, I totally agree. I hate those shows. I don't do those shows. It's like, where do I start? Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Do I start with one that's going to make me hate the band, like this kind of music from the band, like the fact that we're all surrounded by the trappings of the 80s, the 70s, the 90s? It's ridiculous, right?
Start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
we've all been on those shows with
recommend an album for me, right? It's
No,
like,
Rush is a good example.
why am I going to tell you the best album of their 20 and then everything's downhill from there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, with Rush, we do these shows, and there's been a lot of people, different age. Look at Philip, born in 1983. Rush, when all these shows, when we're talking about it, everybody has a different opinion. Different age groups have a different opinion. And with Rush is such a great example because everybody will go, well, I like the 80s stuff. I don't care for the 70s stuff. Look at God, it's horrible. And I'm sitting here going, what the hell are you talking about? It all depends upon your gateway drug, I think. But you should.
What would help me, Grant?
You should start at the beginning, like Peter says.
But what would help me, like Power Windows, is someone really smart writing 3 or 4 or 5 pages on it, telling me exactly what to look for at 1:15, at 1:30 in this song. And it's like, oh,
that would help.
Right. That is really cool. Now they use this effect. Now they use this effect. He only uses acoustic drums here, right? This is a mix, right? So once I'm told all those really cool things to look for, I'm like totally invested, right?
Real quick, the best restaurant critiques or suggestions are not going to tell me what I will like and dislike. It will tell me what to expect. And that is different. You can give me the menu, fine. But they say, oh, it had a quiet atmosphere with this, and there was easy to talk, and the lighting was great, and this and that and the other thing. Okay, if I like the food, I like the food. If I don't, I don't. That's not on you. That's on me. Mm-hmm. And so, but it'll tell me something that I can get a sense of, and then it's up to me to formulate the rest of it.
Yeah, that is very true indeed. And something else I was thinking, because you guys mentioned crowds, and Grant, you mentioned crowds, and getting into Kiss because everyone else was listening to it. Mm-hmm. It depends also on where you are in the world. Like, let me give an example from something kind of recent. In 2012, when I was living in Scotland, where I did all my postgraduate studies, I had seen a video clip on YouTube of Rival Sons' Pressure and Time. It had already close to 1 million views, I think. I just loved that song. And I saw an announcement that they're coming to play at a small venue. They were still a small band. I saw them live. I was blown away. I got everything they had on the spot. And then I discovered that basically these guys are getting gradually, little by little, really big in Europe, in the UK, in Central Europe, Belgium, these kind of parts. But they come from Long Beach, I think. They come from California, some from the US. And they're not big in the US. And today, where they're much bigger in the US than they were before, they are still much, much bigger in Europe than they were in the US. So for instance, Kiss, they were never big in Greece. I didn't know anyone who listened to them. I never got into them because nobody ever kind of tried to convince me to through the consensus, critics, public, whatever, right? On the contrary, the public that I knew from personally, not again in the ether, were all into the really brutal stuff, which I also went and bought. And years later, I realized that I had just convinced myself that I like it just because of the crowd. And I just sold everything because I was like, I don't like black metal. What the hell?
Well, and we look at the difference again, we said is, accessibility, and Martin's exactly right. I was in Barnes and Noble. We still have a brick and mortar bookstore here in North Dakota. And you walk through the CD section, you're like $4.99, $5.99. I was thinking, well, look, I do high res digital streaming for $20 a month. I mean, how many would I have to buy to get only 4 or 5 records? I get the whole bloody catalog for $20, right? So I don't need it. And the difference was back in the day before the internet, especially, is you'd be in certain countries where you couldn't get them unless they were pirated, illegal, bootlegs, you stole them. You tried to get them from other countries. So they weren't experiencing things the same way. They weren't walking into record stores, once a weekend with their buddy and just bin jumping all day, where you just start raffling through. And to me, that's where things started to really develop. And that was my gateway to bands, was putting the time in to walk through the record store. And now you're influenced by, and this is another topic for another day, album covers, art, label, names of bands, those kinds of things. And that's how we discovered most of this stuff. And then to find out after, if they became more popular, now they get written about. And we're like, hey, we've been with these guys before you guys ever said a bloody word. And then afterwards, they formulate opinions. Bands that have been around this long, it's way easier to write about the football game on Tuesday than it is on Monday.
Yeah.
Because we're smarter on Tuesday. And if their catalog is already done, Zeppelin's catalog is done, they can go through it and go, well, In Through the Outdoor is kind of sub. Well, based on what? It's
On
not
the consensus.
It's not quantifiable. And it only matters to Philip or anybody else who's listening to it. Martin's choice of Down to Earth, I don't care if it's contrarian or ridiculous or perfect. It's the album he loves, and he doesn't like Child in Time, so people give him a break. It's okay. He doesn't like Child in Time, and that's more than
getting
fair.
Converted.
It's more than fair. So leave him alone. And I know he's a big boy; he can take care of himself. But my point is, these things are true to the individual. And we have the outside sources trying to penetrate that individuality to promote into a larger collective. And that will always be a little bit of a rub.
Peter, the other funny thing that's happening now is we yap and yap and yap about these albums so much that all of a sudden, you're going to find out when Grant posts the show, Nostradamus is a good album. Kiss Unmasked is a good album. Dynasty is a good album. The Elder's a good album, right? So what's happened over time, just because we've got tired about talking about the consensus great albums, all the also rans, dark horses, whatever you want to call them, they're all 7s and 8s now. They're not 4s and 3s anymore, right?
Yeah.
So everything's come up. So it's like all of a sudden, when that catalog has been ossified for 20, 30, 40 years, everybody's going back and looking at those crappy albums, and all of a sudden, voila, they're good albums all of a sudden, right?
Does that mean that, for instance, in 30 years from now, people are going to be saying that Saint Anger is a masterpiece?
Yes, that's what's already happening with everything. So absolutely.
Can't there be a consensus that an album, like, again, it's really subjective. I'm just giving one example. There's not a canon for these things, but can't there be like a consensus amongst, like, I don't know, 9 out of 10 people that an album like Saint Anger is really objectively, with a good set of criteria, not good? No,
but the point is, Philip, you'll be able to go and find 100 really smart people who love Saint Anger. The consensus is still, there's 1,000 guys on the internet, extolling the virtues of the Ride Lightning and Master Puppets. But the point is is if you are in a bubble and you want to be in a certain bubble, you probably already can go on the internet and spend hours and hours and hours listening to people just raving about St. Anger.
And it's not just that. It is now a modus of agenda and purpose for those 100 to find 101, to find 102. It is their motivation to make that collective larger so it has a bigger impact and has a bigger pushback, because they've been downtrodden. They've been pushed down. You're not as valuable. You're not as important. And they're saying, oh, wait a second. And now they want to rise from underneath. And I think that is both good and bad. It depends how it's done, but people want to be included with the people who agree with them because it's mutually beneficial to everybody in the group to all feel better.
Well, the same thing applies to bands versus albums within bands.
Absolutely.
When Grant and Pete do a ranking show on Player, it validates Player. But the fact of the matter is, we're supposed to think Player's a crappy band and they're not worth talking about and they should be forgotten. But you get a couple of smart people talking about a catalog of all of these different bands smartly, and all of a sudden they're validated. And
I have to say this before I forget it. I will not name names. It's not polite. I heard once on a show, it's a hard rock metal show, and someone picked a couple tracks that they enjoyed for whatever the criteria was. And there was the rolling of the eyes, and there was the, oh, are you kidding? That's nuts. Us metal people aren't supposed to like music like that.
Exactly.
That is the poster and the bumper sticker for closed-mindedness and absurdity in my book. What do you mean?
Yeah.
You've been brainwashed. Metal guys don't like pop. Metal guys can't like the Bee Gees. This is where labels, and that's another show as well. Music is music. We've attributed it to a million people, Duke Ellington, whomever. There's only two kinds.
I think that's a holdover from when you were a kid. Because with your buddies, this is what you guys like. Could we like Bee Gees Saturday Night Fever? No, we can't like that. We would never listen to that. We got ridiculed.
Yeah.
And I think that's a holdover from when you were a kid.
And that's a powerful socialization.
Yeah.
You know, every year when the anniversary of the disco demolition comes up in Chicago, I see more and more people who years ago said, yeah, it was so cool. Now, years later, they're going, oh, that was really dumb. Yeah, it was dumb. It was dangerous. People got hurt. It was stupid. Yeah.
Of course, disco never went away. It just morphed into something else.
No.
But, speaking from when we were kids, and I mentioned this in the beginning, where like now that I'm kind of older and I'm looking back, when especially we were much younger and we're, let's say, teenagers, whatever, and we were getting into this stuff and we had a certain teenage childish enthusiasm about things, and we also were trying to maybe fit in with a crowd and to follow the consensus and all that, we really started like loving certain bands and artists so much that we lost any sense of, how should I say it, sobriety. So like me as a teenage Iron Maiden fan, I was not sober at all. So I experienced in real time, the first full-length record of Iron Maiden that I experienced in real time was Virtual 11. When it came out, I bought all the singles, which I still have. They're tattooed, totally destroyed. I listened to the album fanatically. The first ever live concert I saw of Iron Maiden was with Blaze Bayley, and I loved that album. Years later, I realized that I just was not sober. I had totally convinced myself that I love it, and years later, I'm like, this album has maybe 2 tunes that are sort of worthwhile, and the rest is just crap. It's really bad. It's like when you grow up and you like, I used to love this movie when I was a kid, and then I see it now, and I'm like, I'm just cringing watching this movie that I used to love,
Yeah, but that comes with experience too.
That's the thing, right? You follow the consensus, critical or public, when you're much younger, but then you realize you didn't have much experience back then.
Well, when I was a kid, I tried to convince myself because a Rolling Stone hated Kiss that I didn't like Kiss, even though my friends liked it and I would go along with it. But then I determined in my later years I like Kiss, and I like it, you know, and things just kind of come around. But you know,
Here's a funny point I just realized. When we were kids, we didn't use the critics. We read everything. We took in all those record reviews. We bought all the magazines all the time. We were reading critics all the time. But we were too impatient. We bought the record before we could find a review on it. So you were always risking all those categories. Pete mentions, you know, the instruments, the long hair, are the album song titles violent enough? Does it look heavy? All those things, right? So the funny thing is, I can't think off the top of my head right now too many moments at all where I was in any luxury position to actually read the review and then go consider buying it based on the review. We bought it first and then read the critics.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and my next door neighbor, Joe, who I grew up with, was my music buddy. And we got to the point where, because it was getting to be expensive for each of us to keep buying it at the same time, when we would discover something, we'd alternate. And if it was a dog, we'd go, okay, it only cost one of us. Next time you buy it, and then we're not out a second album. But if we loved it, we went back, and then the other person bought it. So each of us had our own copy. You know, and that kind of thing is that we didn't have that motivation to go out and do it. We always had it, like Martin said, before anybody was telling us. And like Grant was saying, the socialization aspect of it, when you're 12, 13, no internet, everything else, there's really only a couple things. If you're male, we'll just keep it male for now. You either were sports, or it was music, or maybe both. But those are the things you talked about in comic books or whatever, depending on your age. But those are the things you showed off to your friends. And those are the things you shared with your friends, and you brought them over. And you'd get a new record and say, oh, I got some new records. And you'd have 4 or 5 of you in your parents' living room, because they had the big stereo, and you'd listen to stuff. And it would, some guys, some guys no, or whatever. And that's the way it happened.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, I went, a great record buying day. I bought Farewell to the Kings, and my buddy bought I, Robot from Alan Parsons when they had both just come out. I can see his bedroom. I could describe his stereo to you, everything. So we listened to I, Robot first, and we were both very impressed. We loved it. He was not a big Rush fan. A Farewell to Kings is a drastic change from All the World's a Stage, which was the last thing I had heard. We hear the acoustic guitar and the bells and everything. He starts laughing at me. He's like, this sucks. I thought you told me this was a heavy band. Or when the band kicks in, and then I said, see, it was just an intro. And he's like, I still don't like him. And he never did, but it was but we didn't make fun of each other. He would listen to Alan Parsons. I would listen to Alan Parsons, and I'd listen to Rush, and he wouldn't listen to Rush. And it was okay. The
other big thing that we had when we were kids, and I'm just thinking about, you know, we only had like 13 channels, not very many channels, but we did have the USA Network. And they showed Night Flight on the weekends. Now that was a big influence on us, because I remember when they first played the band UK, that was my gateway drug, because they would play those UK videos. That's the first time I ever saw Rust Never Sleeps. You saw New Wave Theater. It totally, because we didn't have MTV, but Night Flight was like a gateway drug. I went right out and bought UK's album. I would never have thought to go buy that had I not seen that on.
I discovered
Night Flight
bands watching Midnight Special and Don Kirshner's.
There you go. That was a big influence.
Yeah, Kirshner's was more leaning on the harder edge. Midnight Special would play everything. You'd get pop, you'd get everything, and you're going, wow. Now, I also think one of the biggest influences, the one we haven't talked about, and in my case, it's essential, are siblings and or immediate neighbors. I have 2 older sisters, 3 years and 6 years older than me. So they are avid music listeners as well. So I was exposed to an entire decade of the 60s before I would have if it was just me. I would have missed all that. I was in my single digits, but I was rating their stuff at 8, 7, 9 years old. I would 45s, albums. And next door to me, they had 5 boys. The youngest was my age, and they all went older from there. And I'd go over to their house. Oh, what are they playing? They're playing in rock. Oh, what are they playing? They're playing Paranoid. Whoa. I'm like, whoa, wait. What is all this stuff? That was my pool of influences and education and exposure. I'm like, oh, who's that? Who's this? Who's that? I've told the story that my sisters had Jesus Christ Superstar, heard that, went over to my neighbor's house, heard in rock, put 2 and 2 together and go, that's the same dude. He's in what? Well, the love of Deep Purple has never left. And that's how it got exposed. That was never going to show up in a magazine or a review or anything like that. It was like-minded other music people where you got exposed to things.
Yeah.
And nothing was better than an older cousin or an older brother of a friend with an 8-track player and a Mustang, right? I mean, you listen to music that way.
Exactly.
Somebody's Camaro before you get your driver's license, and you're that's a golden album now all of a sudden, right?
71 Nova. We used to go deliver papers with my next door neighbor. On constant rotation were the first 2 Cars albums on 8-track, the only way to listen to them, and the first Boston album. We played him over and over again. And that was a big influence because he's an older kid.
Yeah.
We're thinking, he's cool. He's got a Nova. And we get to go out with him, help deliver papers. Yeah. But you're playing this music. It just ingrains in your just brain. It's just burned in there.
Yeah, there is
big
the
influence.
risk of oversaturation. And I think right now, a lot of people would suggest that the internet is just so overwhelming. It's so big. It's so enormously in our faces all the time with people telling you should like this, you should not like this, don't like this. I always go to my example is that Dr. Seuss and the Sneetches taught us over 60 years ago that being different is okay. We don't have to be like each other. Mm-hmm. We still haven't figured that out as a people. Maybe we'll get it one of these days. But music is an amalgamation of that, and it is a microcosmic collection of, there is a little bit of territorialism going on, and there's a little bit of pride. Well, sometimes a lot of pride, and it's this is my band. I'm vested, and the more you have spent time with them, and the more that it is seeped into your DNA, as Grant has said, the more you have a personal kind of a front to it. Now, hopefully maturity blesses you with a little bit of hindsight and perspective that says, hey, okay, it's all right if you don't like that. That's fine. But don't tell me I can't like it. That's the line. Go ahead and say you don't care for it. I will never question that. I will never challenge you because that's your opinion. But don't tell me I shouldn't like it, because now you've crossed a line, and then I will get defensive. So there's the only difference. So,
yeah, I was also wondering. You mentioned earlier, Pete, that let's talk about gender, about male first of all, right? And that got me thinking, like, I remembered how, like, again, where I come from, there was a point, I don't remember when in the noughties exactly, where every single teenage girl and every woman in her 20s would always listen to Him, the band Him, which was like marketed as a band that somehow for like goth girls or something like this. And how, like, I don't know, some kind of ideology around gender says that a certain demographic of girls and women should listen to this. And you go to a concert of Him and it's all girls and women. A small minority are men. What kind of, like, how is this fashion created where, like, suddenly all the girls at school are listening to Him and only to that band, Well,
look, the whole idols thing and the level of which someone wants to be included is a very powerful thing. We talk about the Swifties, and I don't accept anybody who wants to dog her. She's very talented and she's done what she's done. You don't have to care for what she's doing. That's fine. But she's clearly talented. Madonna was doing that way before, and all of a sudden everybody's dressing like Madonna if you were a certain age female.
That's pop music, I guess. Yeah,
and so those things go well beyond music. And I do think that it's fair to suggest that there's a good portion of them who were included where the music really doesn't play a big factor. It is more being a part of the larger collective.
It's a fashion statement. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also a snowball effect, right? A crowd begets a bigger crowd, and so where all these girls are together, and now there's going to be more girls together because of that. So it's an exponential snowball thing too, right?
Look, the running joke.
The monkeys all want to belong.
Well, the running joke back in the day was, you know, whatever you do, just if your girlfriend or somebody says, I want to go see Earth, Wind, and Fire, you just shake your head and go, okay, because 3/4 of the crowd is going to be females. You know, no, it's not nice to.
You know, another thing I'm really always fascinated about is this idea of, say, Back in Black selling 30 million copies, and then AC/DC having 5 or 6 gold records, right? Mm-hmm. So who are those 29,500,000 people? Yeah. Is there a concept or a thought that out there in the wider world, maybe you just need to own one AC/DC album? Right? Maybe getting one satisfies the urge. Maybe you just need to own one Metallica album. Maybe you're kind of like an uncommon person if you even need to own 2 Metallica albums. But there's a lot of people with that album selling so many copies. You know, maybe out there in the normie world, you need to own one hair metal album, and that's Appetite for Destruction, right? And you don't need to, you know. Maybe the idea is you only need to own one. Maybe the idea also, though, which is even more sensible, is maybe you only need to own the best hair metal album. So maybe if you have many other things in your life and hobbies that don't have anything to do with music, maybe that's why you don't need a Faster Pussycat album and a Love Hate album and a Cats and Boots album, which are all 85%, or I would argue in the case of Love Hate, 140% as good as Appetite for Destruction, right? Yeah. So, you know, so why are there Faster Pussycat albums and Cats and Boots albums that sell 250,000 copies and they're over with, and yet there's this one album that's very similar that has sold 30 or 40 million? Maybe you just need to own one album like that. Maybe you need to just own one album by that band. Maybe you only need to own the best album by that band.
Well, you have,
and you know what? They on Spotify, you with what you said earlier about time, all you need to do is listen to one song. So you have millions and millions of streams for You Shook Me All Night Long or Highway to Hell. I think one of those two. And everyone, including casual fans, will listen only to that one song. Go ahead, Pete.
Well, you've just outlined and nailed my wife and I's relationship to the
Oh dear.
We like the same bands, but we start and stop at exactly the crossroad of a different era. My wife will not listen to anything from Def Leppard prior to Hysteria, and I stop at that point. And all she needs is Hysteria. She will get adrenalized. She'll listen to it for a while. Maybe she listened to X or whatever, but she goes back to Hysteria. That's her Def Leppard record.
But I think women, the way they listen to music, I think it's totally different than the way men do.
I don't think not all.
I do. My wife could just listen to the radio, and she doesn't want to listen to an album. She just wants songs to be tracks to be constantly different. No album, she gets bored.
But the difference is, we'll be out in public, and stuff will come on, let's say in the mall or whatever, and it's newer. I've got no concept of who this is. And my wife knows every song. She knows every track, every lyric. And I'm like, what is this? Oh, this is such and such. I go, when do you listen to?
If it's probably pop band that's on, you know, FM top.
Whatever radio. She is streaming and listening to is just, like you said, Philip, song after song after song after song after song, where a lot of us in this environment, we go, okay, well, that's great. Today I'm in the mood for such and such. It's album, start, finish, album, start, finish. Maybe I'll pick a song here or there. But that's, you know, again, the difference in how people listen to things and how much time they spend in it, you know. And I think that's why it's interesting that when we were talking about how do you suggest something to somebody, well, it really more so depends on how you listen. if you're not going to listen to a whole album, don't ask me the question, because I don't think you're really interested in the band, in my personal opinion. If you don't want to listen to the whole album, if you just want the other, just get every band's greatest hits and be done with it.
On that subject, the same thing. I was thinking, I did a whole podcast episode on this thing about certain albums that are gold based on Spotify plays that haven't been certified, and there's nobody going out and doing it. And one of those is, I kind of did the math, and I'm pretty sure Motorhead Ace of Spades is gold. Based on the 15,000 per album plays per album. But the funny thing is, this lines up a little bit with what Philip said, and my earlier point is that Motorhead and Lemmy are such an abrasive experience that normal people out there don't even need a full album of Motorhead. They need one song once in a while, and that's it. That fills their quota, right? And so it's really the same thing as AC/DC Back in Black, but AC/DC is exactly 10 times less abrasive. So the normies out there in the world, they need one AC/DC album, but with Motorhead, they need one Motorhead song.
Right.
Different levels.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, kids, we've went an hour. I think we probably should wrap this up. I don't think that we are gonna. It's a great discussion, but
I would conclude from my side at least that I definitely was influenced a lot by consensus, public, critical, and I needed some guidance from critics who I considered as an authority, and I needed to somehow learn things from my crowd. But I did mature much later, and I discovered what I really like personally, individually, my own taste later on when I gained more experience. I think that's really important.
yeah,
I'll
you're
just
like
say
the
I need
opposite
critics
of me.
more than ever. More than ever now, I need critics. More than ever, if I want to go search something out, I got to read a review or two, but I got to read the wiki page, and I got to read those top 10 lists.
Exactly.
I think for me, I would just say that when you watch shows like ours and other shows, when we suggest things, and we've said this over and over, we're just trying to get you to be exposed to things you may not have experienced. You've formulated your opinions on the things you already know. Me saying I love or don't like an album shouldn't change what you feel or don't feel about a record you're already vested in. You have your opinion. You have your ideals of what that is. But when we suggest something new that you maybe haven't heard, and if that makes us a reference, that's great. None of us are telling you we're experts and we know everything and that you should agree with us 1,000% of the time, because that's ridiculous. And it's okay to disagree with us. If we say we like or dislike something, discover it and formulate your own opinion. That's what it's about.
In a sea of media, where we live today, we need critics for music and lots of things.
Well, it's not the sea of media; it's the sea of product. I mean, that's why we need the critics.
Content. Yeah.
I mean, and then we go and find the media, whether it's moving through time like we are right now, or it's something you read. But the problem is, like I say, I think the real reason we need critics more than ever is the fire hose of product.
Yeah.
Someone needs to weed it out.
You got to be able to put a brighter, smaller focus on things. It's searchlight's too big.
Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. So everybody in the comment section, gosh, we could love to have you all on this episode. We want to know from you, has the critical or public consensus influenced your music taste? How do you look at this? How did you look at music when you were a kid, and how do you look at it now? Anyway, this is a great discussion. I don't know if we change any minds, but it's always fun to talk about this stuff. So I want to thank Philip for bringing this up. And of course, we had Peter Jones here tonight, and Martin and myself. If you'd like to be on these panels, we'd love to have you. We have a Patreon that you can join if you'd like to support the channel. That'd be much appreciated. We also have a Ko-fi. Buy us a pint or a cup of coffee. That would be swell if you could support us that way. We also have merch. Go down below. Get yourself a shirt. You need a shirt. And I don't know, we just like talking music here, and we appreciate everybody who's watching, and please leave a comment because we do look at those. All right, gentlemen, great discussion. What's next on the Contrarians? I'm sure there'll be something new tomorrow. I know Martin will have something new tomorrow. Yes. You want to talk about that real quick? the new
Oh
series?
yeah,
Just
well,
real-
it kind of relates to what
2
we're doing
minutes.
here, but we started this new thing called reliving old reviews as a useless tool of confusion, where we actually look at old reviews from the old days of albums that turned out to be groundbreaking albums or whatever, and I just read them and comment on them as we go. They're like 5-minute clips. We've done about a dozen of them so far.
Yeah, check them out. I try to throw one up every day, so stay tuned. It goes up early in the morning. All right, gentlemen, great discussion. Nice to see you.
All right,
We'll
thanks,
see you on
guys.
the next one.
We'll talk to you later.
See
Bye
you.
now.
All right,
Bye.
see ya.